Okay, welcome to Ranger Strength Certification. And in this lesson, we will be reviewing gravity. And this lesson of all of them will be the shortest lesson, but it is a very important concept for us to understand as flexibility coaches, how gravity can affect the outcome of our training for flexibility, how it can best be organized to help people achieve the level of flexibility and range that they're looking for. So within this lesson, our objectives will be to define gravity in relation to flexibility training specifically and training in general, but flexibility training specifically. We will discuss the specific methods of application for it, the best that you can use with what you're learning in range of strength. And then we'll review the practical standard required for this lesson that aligns with the physical standards. So when we think of gravity in terms of how it can affect the outcome of a training session, we can categorize it in three ways. First, assisted. So think about how movement can use gravity to assist us into a deeper range. The best example of this would be standing folds. So if we are in a standing position and we fold our body down to create range through the hamstrings and the low back, we're using gravity to assist us going down. So we're moving downward. We're being assisted through that range. The second one would be neutral positions. So a neutral position would be where we're not fighting against gravity at all, but rather just using the outcome of our own range of motion and strength to move it through a position. So again, if we're thinking about the pike, a seated pike position, moving forward in a linear path, would not be assisted by gravity, nor would it be working against gravity. We would be just using the force of our own range and strength to move through that plane. And lastly, we can categorize it as resisted. So resisting gravity. Again, if we think about that pike position, if we then lift the legs into a static active position, we're resisting against gravity. So looking at these three exercises is actually a sequence of how you could train your pike. You could warm up with an assisted pike exercise, assisted standing pike stretch, assisted by gravity. You could then use that new open range that you received from the assisted movement to then move into a neutral position. And then you could then strengthen against that position with a movement like a hanging L-sit or a standing leg lift. So it's actually a nice series. As flexibility coaches, we need to understand movements and how they are affected by gravity so that we can best organize a training session around these components to set someone up for success. Assisted movements are obviously going to be prioritized as warm-up based movements and or movements that we would have level of ability at more of a beginner stage. Neutral movements, for the most part, are good at all levels, but are going to be best for individuals that need to challenge new strengths and ranges. And resisted movements, think traditional strength. We're building strength, opposing the flexibility. So let's take a look at some best methods of application for programming and prescription. We want to be considering the categorization of movements and how they are affected by gravity at all levels of ability so that we can better assist individuals. At a beginner stage, it could be more focused on assisted gravity movements. At an advanced stage, we could be more focused at neutral gravity position, resisted gravity position movements, and just creating that balance of structure throughout the training session. So some examples of what we've previously learned. We can look at what we've learned from lesson 1 in body weight static stretches and recognize that many of these movements can be categorized as assisted gravity movements, as well as some of the movements in the loaded range exercise. We are using external load to assist us in moving into new ranges of motion. And this is something that we've talked on the support calls about. Comes up a lot about, when should I start adding weight to these flexibility and range exercises? And for the most part, start doing it right away, but the outcome of that is different based on level of ability. So for a beginner, they're using that very light weight to get feedback and to get access to a new range of motion that's outside of their everyday operating range. So assisted loaded range work would be more at that beginner stage in looking for feedback. But if we were to go into a higher intensity with those loads, we wouldn't necessarily be thinking about using that load to just assist us in getting into a new range, but rather to just be strong through full range of motion and use more of a traditional application of strength. Neutral gravity categorized exercises. Again, we can think about the body weight static lessons as well. And so some of those positions can be manipulated to just be neutral against gravity and allow an individual to assess the tolerance of their own strength and their own articulation of a movement rather than thinking about the resisted and or assisted positions against gravity. But we can also think about these neutral positions as we move into more advanced exercise, such as ballistic stretching. And this is most common in a seated pike movement. So in a seated pike movement, we know that neutral positions are usually the hardest for people to break barriers in and to build strength in, especially in pancake. So I'm talking about, seated pancake splits. So we can establish a baseline, establish some foundation ability in the pancake split, and then we can move into higher intensity movements and categorization of ballistic stretching in those positions as a neutral position. But now we're going to start using higher levels of intensity of momentum once we've established that foundation and baseline, and start using neutral positions to build strength into new range. And then just taking a look at resisted categories, categorization for a session, we can think about what we've learned in the end range agonist activation lesson, where we're getting moved into a stretch position, but only to a point where we can then create that activation of the agonist muscles that are shortening and lifting ourselves into a deeper stretch. And again, the key to that is finding an end range where it's difficult to do so, and we're staying in that work window of 1 to 5 reps. Strength, I think traditional strength training. Traditional strength training then really falls under this category as well too. So we can think about how we're now starting to add load, maybe on like a horse stance squat or incline dislocates. And we're really forcing ourselves to work resisted against gravity and really produce more strength. So this would be, if you're looking to, organize a session, these would be your best considerations. So now take what you've learned in each lesson, how those lessons have categorized themselves into the systems. So we have preparatory range work, strength specific range work, and we have specific range work. And then think about how you would organize these range of strength protocols in such a way that you can take advantage of the best use of gravity. Most commonly, people will end up using assisted and neutral flexibility exercises to gravity without even really knowing that they're doing that. And they won't take any consideration into resisted gravity movements, traditional strength training to build better flexibility. And when you build your protocols, this is the kind of hat that I want you to put on. Put on your gravity hat. Look at the movements. Ensure that there is a balance between them. At the start, for an individual that's in a beginner stage, there should be a focus on more assisted and resisted, because they're really looking to build strength. They're also looking to use gravity to be assisted into new range, build that feedback, establish those connections. So for a beginner, they should be really focused on just the assisted to resisted categories. As we start moving into more advanced stages, we may start to look at how we want to have our clients and athletes demonstrate the strengths in these positions and in their flexibility with more neutral positions. We would be looking at focusing more on resisted to build even more strength. And our assisted movements would start to move more into a category of strength training, because now we're not just using a movement to assist us into a new range. We're trying to establish more strength in that range. So more of a isometric static active focus becomes a high intensity range focus, where we're more neutral and working against gravity to build strength. So just that's how you want to be thinking about balancing your sessions out as a flexibility coach. Learn to understand the categorization. So learn to understand the categorization of the system, preparatory range, strength, and specific, and the categorization of gravity and how that can affect the outcome of the session. If it's all assisted and focused, then we need to balance that out. We need to find and ensure that we're using movements that are resisting and establishing those connections and strength as well. For beginners, should be 50-50. More intermediate to advanced, we would start looking at more 75% resisted work, some neutral work, and more of the high intensity range activity. So for this lesson and for the physical standards of this course to pass, you need to demonstrate a 15-second hanging L-sit and also know how to teach that. So review the 15-second standard video, then also review the tutorial that talks about regressing and progressing the movement and how we want to think about doing that for individuals. Because a hanging L-sit can be introduced at lower levels of ability. We introduce someone to hanging. We introduce them to then basically just creating resistance against gravity in their hang. It becomes a big wake-up call for them, like, oh my gosh, just hanging is very difficult. So refer to those tutorials and also refer to the range of strength exercise library. And when you refer to that library, I want you to look at, there's almost 100 exercises there. Look at how you may think about categorizing those exercises under assisted, neutral, and resisted to gravity. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on the workplace and I'll hook you up. Thanks.